Eddie Van Halen stood in the doorway of Ace Frehley's dressing room, still riding the adrenaline high from Van Halen's performance earlier that night, and said the words that would change everything. "You're good at what you do, but could you handle Van Halen material? Be honest." The question came out more confrontational than Eddie had intended, but he didn't take it back. Ace, sitting in front of a mirror with half his Space Ace makeup removed, so his face looked bizarrely split between theatrical character and regular human being, looked at Eddie's reflection and replied without hesitation. "I don't know. Can I borrow your guitar and find out?" 30 minutes later, Eddie was sitting on a road case with his jaw on the floor, pen in hand scribbling notes he'd later study for weeks, watching Ace Frehley play Eruption Note perfect on the first attempt, then add his own variations that somehow made Eddie's revolutionary piece sound even better. Because what Eddie thought was going to be a friendly lesson to the guy in the makeup, a chance to demonstrate the gulf between real musicianship and theatrical showmanship, just turned into the most humbling and educational experience of his young career. It was August 1979 at Oakland Coliseum. Van Halen was opening for Kiss on what would become one of the year's biggest tours. Two bands at completely different stages, representing totally opposite philosophies about rock music. Kiss was established, massive, the ultimate theatrical machine. Makeup, costumes, pyrotechnics, spectacle on a scale that seemed impossible. Van Halen was the new sensation, four guys with no gimmicks who could play their instruments at a level that was rewriting the rules. Eddie's two-handed tapping technique, showcased on their debut album's Eruption solo, had made every guitarist in America rethink what was possible. At 24 years old, Eddie Van Halen was being called the greatest guitarist of his generation by magazines, radio DJs, and fellow musicians. And he was starting to believe his own press, starting to think maybe he had fundamentally changed what the guitar could do. The tapping innovation he'd perfected wasn't entirely new. Other guitarists had dabbled with the concept, but he'd popularized it, refined it, made it the standard by which technical guitar playing would now be judged for decades. He'd become the benchmark against which other players measured themselves. That night in Oakland, Van Halen had opened the show and absolutely crushed. Eddie's performance had been flawless, his solos blazing, his stage presence confident. The crowd of 18,000 had loved them, responded enthusiastically, given them the reception any opening band would kill for. But when Kiss hit the stage, something fundamentally different happened. The energy didn't just increase, it multiplied exponentially, transformed into something almost violent in its intensity. The pyro explosions, the blood spitting, the fire breathing, Gene Simmons flying on wires, Paul Stanley's star-spangled charisma, the platform boots that made them look like giants, the theatrical mayhem that turned a rock concert into something closer to a Broadway show directed by someone on hallucinogens. The crowd went absolutely insane in a way they simply hadn't for Van Halen's technically superior, musically excellent set. Eddie understood it intellectually. Kiss was giving people a full sensory assault, an experience beyond just music. But part of him resented it. His band was musically better, technically better. Yet Kiss got the bigger reaction because of theatrics. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. After Kiss finished their set, Eddie wandered backstage. He wanted to meet Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley, pick their brains about the business side. They'd turned rock and roll into an empire, and Eddie respected that hustle. But as he walked past the dressing rooms, he heard something that stopped him. Guitar playing. Acoustic, unplugged, just someone messing around in that unconscious way musicians do when they're decompressing. Eddie followed the sound to a half-open door. Inside, Ace Frehley sat in front of a mirror, still wearing his silver and black spaceman costume, his makeup half removed so his face looked split between alien and human. He was playing an acoustic guitar, working through some bluesy chord progressions. Nothing fancy, nothing showy. Just feeling the music. Eddie knocked. Ace looked up, set the guitar aside. "Hey, you're Eddie from Van Halen, right? Yeah, hell of a show you guys put on." "Thanks, man. Caught your set from back here. That Eruption solo's insane. The tapping stuff. It's revolutionary." Eddie smiled. "Thanks. It's just technique, though, you know? Two-handed tapping. Been developing it for years." Shows, Ace said, going back to wiping off his makeup, must take serious practice. It does. Eddie paused, then added, maybe because he was still running on adrenaline, maybe because of that lingering resentment. It's real playing, though, not just showmanship. Ace stopped wiping his face. His eyes found Eddie's in the mirror. What do you mean by that? Eddie immediately knew he'd crossed a line, but his ego pushed him forward. No offense. Kiss is great at what you do, the theater, the spectacle. But musically, it's pretty basic, right? I mean, you guys are good at what you do, but could you handle Van Halen's material? Be honest. The room went very quiet. Ace slowly set down his towel, turned in his chair to face Eddie directly. I don't know, he said, his voice even but with an edge underneath. Can I borrow your guitar and find out? Eddie's confidence flickered. You want to try playing Van Halen? Why not? You just said it's all technique. Let's see if the circus guy can handle the real music. That's what you're implying, right? Eddie realized this had escalated from casual conversation to something else entirely. But he'd started it. Backing down now would be worse than whatever was about to happen. Okay, my guitar's in our room. Let's go. The walk down the hallway was silent and tense. Roadies and crew members saw them together, sensed something brewing. Word spread fast. By the time they reached Van Halen's dressing room, a small crowd had formed, including David Lee Roth, who had a sixth sense for drama. What's happening? Roth asked, theatrical as always. Ace wants to try playing some Van Halen, Eddie said, pulling out his guitar. The Frankenstein. His custom-built red, white, and black striped masterpiece that was already iconic. This should be interesting, Roth said, grinning. Not mocking, just genuinely curious. Eddie handed the guitar to Ace. Ace took it, tested the weight, checked the neck. The action was different from his Les Pauls. The pickup configuration was Eddie's custom modification, but Ace had been playing guitar since he was 13. He knew how to adjust. What do you want me to play? Ace asked. Your choice, Eddie said, sitting on a road case. Play whatever proves your point. Ace thought for a moment. He could play something safe, something in his comfort zone, but that would prove nothing. If he was doing this, he needed to go straight at Eddie's ego. How about Eruption? The room went dead silent. Eruption wasn't just a song, it was Eddie's manifesto, his announcement to the world that he'd arrived. Attempting it was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. You know Eruption? Eddie asked, skeptical. I've heard it, a lot. It's all over the radio. The tapping part's pretty recognizable. Knowing a song and playing it are different things. Guess we'll find out. Ace plugged the Frankenstein into a small practice amp. The tone wasn't perfect, but it was enough. He positioned his fingers, took a breath, started playing. Eruption's opening is deceptively simple, almost misleadingly so. Tremolo picking that builds tension before exploding into the complex sections that follow. Ace played it clean and precise, his fingers finding the notes with surprising accuracy for someone playing it for the first time on a completely unfamiliar guitar with different action, different pickup configuration, different everything from what he was used to. Eddie leaned forward despite himself, his initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest, watching Ace's fingers navigate the fretboard with the confidence of someone who'd actually studied this piece. Then Ace hit the tapping section, the part that had made Eddie famous, the technique that had appeared on magazine covers and guitar instruction videos, the innovation that every young guitarist in America was now trying to master in their bedrooms, right hand hammering onto the fretboard instead of just picking, creating that cascading waterfall effect that sounded like something between a guitar and a piano, like an instrument that shouldn't exist but somehow did. Eddie's innovation, his signature, his revolution, the technique he'd spent years perfecting in secret before unveiling it to the world. And Ace nailed it. Not perfectly, Eddie noticed a couple timing issues where Ace rushed slightly, a few notes that weren't completely clean, the tone wasn't quite right through the practice amp. But he got the core of it, understood the fundamental mechanics and musicality. The technique was there. The understanding was there. This wasn't someone faking their way through by muscle memory or luck. This was real playing, real understanding, real musicianship being demonstrated by someone Eddie had dismissed as a theatrical prop. Eddie's expression shifted from skeptical to surprised to something approaching respect. The others in the room stayed silent, understanding they were witnessing something significant. Ace played through the entire piece, 90 seconds of technically demanding work. When he finished, he let the final note ring out, then looked at Eddie. Not bad, right? For a circus performer. Eddie stood slowly. That was really good. How did you learn that so fast? I didn't learn it fast. I've been playing guitar 15 years. You think I haven't been paying attention to what you're doing? You think because I wear makeup I don't study technique? He handed the guitar back. You're not the first person to invent tapping. You're just the one who popularized it. The technique's been around. I've been working with it for years. I just don't showcase it the way you do because that's not what KISS is about. Eddie looked at his guitar, then at Ace. I underestimated you. I apologize. You want to know the real difference between us? Ace asked. It's not technical skill. We're both good. The difference is philosophy. You believe guitar playing is about demonstrating technical mastery. I believe it's about serving the song. Neither of us is wrong. We're just different. David Lee Roth started clapping slowly. That was beautiful. A guitar summit. Someone should have recorded this. Eddie was still processing. Can I ask you something? Why don't you showcase more technical ability in KISS songs? Why hide it? I'm not hiding it, Ace said. I'm using it appropriately. Every solo I play in KISS serves the song. It's not about showing off. It's about making the song better. Could I shred all over every track? Sure, but why? That's not what the song needs. Doesn't that frustrate you? Eddie asked, genuinely curious. Having ability you don't fully display? Ace thought about this. No, because I get to make millions of people happy. I get to be part of something bigger than my guitar playing. KISS isn't about me showing how good I am. It's about creating an experience. The makeup, the fire, the show. That's not compensation for lack of skill. It's enhancement of skill in service of entertainment. Eddie sat back down. His entire demeanor changed. I've been looking at this all wrong. You think? Ace said, but he was smiling. The tension had broken. My turn, Eddie said. You played my song. I want to try playing like you. Show me something from KISS. Teach me a solo. Ace looked surprised. You want to learn KISS? Yeah, show me Shock Me. That's your song, right? For the next 30 minutes, maybe longer, nobody was really watching the clock anymore. The two guitarists sat together cross-legged on the dressing room floor like students in a music class, Eddie's Frankenstein passing back and forth between them like a peace pipe in some sacred ritual. Each one teaching the other. Each one learning not just techniques, but entire philosophies about what the guitar was supposed to do, what music was supposed to accomplish, what it meant to be a guitarist versus what it meant to be a performer. Ace showed Eddie how he approached melody construction, the way he thought about building solos around emotion first and technical execution second, letting the feeling dictate what his fingers would do rather than letting his fingers dictate what the listener would feel. He demonstrated his vibrato technique, the way he used the slight wobble to add humanity and warmth to sustained notes, making them breathe like living things. He explained his philosophy about space and silence, how the notes you don't play are sometimes more important than the ones you do. Eddie showed Ace his modifications, walking him through the specific tweaks he'd made to the Frankenstein to achieve his unique sounds. The rewiring of the pickups, the specific gauge of strings he used and why, the way he'd lowered the action to facilitate faster playing but raised it slightly in certain areas to prevent fret buzz, the exact angle he held his pick and how that affected tone and attack. Technical minutiae that most guitarists never thought about but that separated good players from revolutionary ones. The crowd that had gathered expecting a confrontation witnessed a masterclass instead. Two completely different approaches to the same instrument, both valid, both powerful, both serving different purposes. Paul Stanley walked in at some point, saw what was happening, smiled. He'd always known Ace could do this. The world underestimated Ace because of the makeup, but Paul knew the truth. Ace Frehley was one of the most talented guitarists in rock. He just chose to be part of something larger than his own ego. Eventually, their session wound down. Eddie and Ace were both sweating, both grinning, both having experienced something unexpected and valuable. "You know what I learned tonight?" Eddie said. "I learned I was being a snob. I thought because Van Halen is about virtuosity and Kiss is about theater, that meant we were more legitimate. But you guys are legitimate too, just differently. And I learned that I need to push myself more technically," Ace said. "You made me realize I've gotten comfortable. I can do more, should do more. Maybe not in Kiss, but in my own playing, my own projects." They shook hands, but it felt like more than a handshake. It felt like mutual recognition, two masters in different disciplines acknowledging each other's mastery. "We should do this again," Eddie said. "Get together, just play, learn from each other." "I'd like that," Ace agreed. They did get together again several times over the years, sometimes to jam, sometimes to work on ideas, sometimes just to hang out and talk about guitars and life and music. They became real friends, built on that night in Oakland when confrontation became collaboration. Years later, in a 1996 interview, Eddie Van Halen was asked about his influences and guitarists he respected. His answer surprised the interviewer. "Ace Frehley is massively underrated. People see the makeup and think it's a gimmick, but Ace can play, really play. He's got technique, he's got feel, he's got everything. I learned that the hard way when I challenged him, and he proceeded to play my own song back at me. It was humbling and educational. Ace taught me there's more than one way to be a great guitarist." Ace, characteristically modest when asked about the same encounter, said simply, "Eddie and I jammed one night. It was fun. He's incredible. Obviously changed guitar playing. I learned a lot from him, but I think maybe he learned that the Kiss guys aren't just clowns in makeup. We can actually play our instruments." The story became legendary in guitar circles. Different versions emerged over the years, some exaggerated, some simplified, but the core remained true. Two guitarists from different worlds met, challenged each other, walked away with greater respect for each other's approach. The incident changed how some people viewed Kiss. The narrative had always been more show than substance, but when Eddie Van Halen, the guitar prodigy who revolutionized the instrument, publicly stated his respect for Ace Frehley's abilities, it forced reconsideration. Maybe Kiss was both spectacle and substance. Maybe the two weren't mutually exclusive. For Ace, the encounter reinforced something he'd always believed, but sometimes doubted during harsh criticism. He was a real guitarist, not just a guy in makeup. A real musician with real abilities who'd chosen to apply those abilities in service of entertainment rather than pure technical exhibition. And there was nothing wrong with that choice. For Eddie, it was a reminder about assumptions and ego. He'd walked into that dressing room confident in his superiority, certain that theatrical bands were lesser than technically focused bands. He walked out understanding that superiority is a false concept. There are only different approaches, different philosophies, different ways of connecting with audiences, none inherently better than others. The practice amp they used that night became a piece of rock history. The road case Eddie sat on while watching Ace play was later marked with a Sharpie by someone who'd been there. Eddie met his match August 79th. In the decades that followed, whenever young guitarists debated technical virtuosity versus emotional playing, older musicians who knew the story would bring up that night in Oakland. The night Eddie Van Halen learned not to judge a guitarist by his costume. The night Ace Frehley proved spectacle and substance weren't opposing forces. The night two legends challenged each other and both came away better for it. Sometimes the best education comes from being wrong, and sometimes the best friendships start with someone proving you misjudged them. Eddie Van Halen and Ace Frehley both learned that lesson in a cramped dressing room in Oakland, surrounded by equipment and egos and eventually mutual respect. The last time they saw each other, years before Eddie's death in 2020, Ace reminded Eddie of that night. "Remember when you asked if I could handle Van Halen material?" Eddie laughed. "I was such an arrogant kid. You should have punched me." "Nah," Ace said. "I did something better. I played your guitar and made you rethink everything." "You did," Eddie agreed. "And I'm grateful for it. You made me a better musician and a better person." "Same," Ace said. You pushed me to not settle, to keep challenging myself, even if I don't always show it publicly. That was the real legacy of that night. Not just a cool story about two guitar heroes meeting, but a genuine exchange of ideas, a mutual elevation, a moment when competition gave way to collaboration and ego gave way to respect. In a business full of confrontations and rivalries, it stood out as something rarer.